I'm Sam.
And this is Gabe.
And this is Coaster Wars.
Alright, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Coaster Wars podcast, where today we will be doing nothing but torturing me. So that's the entire episode. That's all we got for you. There's nothing else. So I hope you enjoy.
We're bringing back a special episode that we did back in season 1. We're doing a question everything episode. Now, if you have not listened to our season 1 episode, I'll give you a quick rundown of the format here. Basically, I'm going to ask Gabe a whole bunch of questions, and he is not allowed to look up the answers. He does not have access to the internet. He's just got to kind of BS his way through these answers. And, today, our episode, this episode is going to kind of just specifically be focusing on ride elements and forces, and to kind of give a better structure to the episode, I'm basically going to ask Gabe to explain a whole bunch of just roller coaster elements, and then as part of that, he's going to kind of explain the different forces that are involved in those specific elements.
Sure. We'll go with that.
I believe in
fun.
you.
This will honestly be fun. I am not using any internet sources. Obviously, I cannot prove that, but there will be no research. There will be no secondary help. I think I should have a lifeline. A call a friend, maybe. You'll be my call a friend if I need one.
Okay, this is good. I got my laptop in front of me. I'll be able to Google a quick answer if need be.
But yeah, these episodes I do kind of joke about them, but they are actually pretty fun just because I do get to try and bullshit my way through them, which is like the definition of my personality. So
it really is.
I mean, it works out in the end. It really does.
It really does. And just as a reminder, quick before we get started here, we'll probably continue these question everything episodes, trying to fit at least one in every season. Go ahead and email any questions you might have to our email, or just comment in any of our socials or anything like that, and I'll actually be able to give your questions to Gabe. But with that, we're going to get straight into this, and I figure we should start off with one of the most quintessential ride elements there is. It's practically what makes a roller coaster, and most every roller coaster has one of these. Gabe, what the hell is a drop?
A
drop.
I was close.
You were, actually.
A drop is a drop. You drop. That's what a drop is.
We need more explanation than that. Come on.
So typically a drop is any point in a roller coaster where you start at a higher elevation or height and end at a lower elevation or height. Basically, you lose elevation. Typically, you will feel some form of zero Gs. Obviously, certain drops are more powerful than others. Some are more steeper than others. Some are a lot bigger than others, but typically you do feel a little bit of some form of either zero Gs or negative Gs.
All right. And then as kind of part of that, what do we mean when we say it goes below grade? Because we say that a lot.
Below grade. So typically what you would call your below grade is like it drops below ground. However, this doesn't necessarily have to be underground. Sometimes coasters will drop into a valley or like off a cliff or something like that nature. So typically what I consider below grade would be like below station height. So obviously if the station is at, higher elevation and then you go up a lift hill and then you drop into a valley, that's going to be below the station height or below grade. Basically what that also means is that your drop is going to be higher than the height of the coaster. So coasters that are like Raging Bull, its top height is only 204 feet, but its top drop height's like 208. That's because it actually drops into a tunnel. A good example of this would be Orion at Kings Island. The actual height of the roller coaster is only 290 some feet, but the drop is exactly 300. That's because it drops into a valley. And that's how they quote unquote get the Giga Coaster. Most controversial Giga Coaster in the world is probably Orion, just for that fact, because it's not technically 300 feet tall.
Yeah.
But that's what we say when it's dropping below grade, is that, and that's typically where you will see it, is if the drop height is larger than the actual physical height of the roller coaster.
All right. And then one last thing I want to talk about when it comes to drops on roller coasters. What the hell are we talking about when we say pre-drop?
Pre-drop. It's a B&M staple. Other companies have used them in the past, but all this is a small, very small little drop before the actual main drop of the roller coaster. It's just usually like 10 or 12 feet. A lot of the older B&Ms feature them.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to think of any other coasters that would have like a pre-drop that we've been on that aren't B&Ms.
I don't really know that they're technically pre-drops, but there are some like older Woody coasters that will have kind of like a turnaround. Like you go
I
up a
would
lift
call that a
hill.
I would call that a pre-drop because you still end up like going down. Demon's another one with a pre-drop.
Mm-hmm.
So some of the old arrows
Arrows.
feature so yeah, it's just a little drop, and it can be like you can go down a little drop and do a turn or a twist, or sometimes like even when we did the Son of Beast episode, the Son
Mm-hmm.
of Beast had a pre-drop.
Oh yeah, I did.
Yeah, so that's all it is just a little drop before the actual first drop.
And as a side note, because this is something that I researched because it bothered me, one of the reasons that they actually started, because me and Gabe discussed this in an episode one time, we're like, we don't really know what the pre drop is for. Well, when I was doing research into it, it was actually to have less stress on the chain from the lift hill at the very top when it's trying to like crest that train over. I think what it does is it helps pull and give the train just a little bit of momentum so that all that pressure isn't centered on like the very tippy top of the chain when it's trying to push that train over. But with that, we're going to move on from drop elements, and I figure we should go on to another staple in roller coaster world. I mean, I swear every single roller coaster's got one of these guys, and there's a whole lot of variations we can get into this. It's airtime hills. So what is just a regular good old-fashioned airtime hill?
Just the just a hill. It looks like a hill, a little hump. That's what an airtime hill is. No, so the best way to describe an airtime hill is I would call it like a peak, or I'm trying to think of the best way to describe it without sounding like an idiot. Because this is a very simple element. Basically, it's a point in a roller coaster where this is the best way I would describe it. So it is a point where in a roller coaster you are heading away from the ground, you are gaining elevation, and you change directions to head back towards the ground. So it's an airtime hill is actually a change in direction.
Okay.
So you get what I'm saying, where the
Yeah.
coaster is heading up, 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 and all of a sudden it crests, it plateaus out, and then heads back towards the ground. It's the change in direction where you actually get the forces of an airtime hill, which is airtime. Now, there are
Mhm.
two different types of airtime that we do have to cover. So
Yep.
there is floater airtime and there is ejector airtime. Basically, what floater airtime is anywhere from zero point 0.9 Gs all the way down to 0 Gs. So
Hmm.
that is the feeling of floating. The best way to describe floater airtime is you're not in the restraint and you're not in the seat. You're just kind of floating there in between everything. It almost feels like you're not touching any part of the train, basically. That's how
Mhm.
I would describe floater airtime. Where ejector airtime is more of a violent force. Basically, you are being ejected out of your seat. That's anywhere from 0 Gs all the way down to -1, -1.5. I don't know what the maximum is, but I don't think there's any coasters that go over like -2 Gs,
Mhm.
because that would just be painful. I mean, that would just be really painful.
Mhm.
Maybe Magnum might. um, but that is basically it is the same thing, but that change of direction happens a lot quicker, and that's where you get almost thrown out of your seat. And a typical ejector airtime, you will be pressed against the restraint of the roller coaster.
Beautiful. So I would like to point out that when we talk about an airtime, our standard airtime hill, although you are gaining elevation and then suddenly losing that elevation, they generally speaking are in a straight line. You are going through straight piece of track. It's just your elevation is changing. So what is an off-axis airtime hill?
An off-axis airtime hill.
Yes.
So an off-axis airtime hill is an RMC staple. They're probably the ones that do it the best. But basically, Typically, an off-axis airtime hill features some kind of turn. It is not a straight airtime hill. A really good example of this would be the off-axis airtime hill that is featured in Air Force One.
Cool.
That is probably the best one I've ever been on, besides maybe Steel Vengeances. It's the one element on Steel Vengeance that I absolutely freaking love. I will say that. But it's basically, it is, if you are turning to the left, so like let's say you're popping up and turning to the left on your airtime hill,
Mm-hmm.
you're going to be banked the opposite direction. So you're going to be banked to the right.
Oh,
You
it's
get what
such
I'm
a
saying?
yeah. I get what you're saying, and when you experience it, it is such a weird concept because you're so used to being banked on basically the inside of the turn, and then
Yes.
this in this case you're banked on the outside, and so you're just like thrown so hard in that direction, especially on the one at Air Force One. But it hits you so good. One on Air Force One is amazing.
And so I've always called them outer banked airtime hills. That's what I've always called them, also known as off-axis airtime hills. Same thing. It's just different terminology, different wording. But yeah, that's exactly what it is. Is it's typically have a little bit of a turn, and then whatever direction you are turning, you are going to be banked the opposite of that. If that makes sense.
Since this is an RMC staple and it's I figure we might talk about the other one then that's kind of sort of in the same vein. What is a wave turn then?
A wave turn is basically the same thing, just more extreme.
Okay.
So, and a wave turn doesn't basically a wave turn is you're at almost a 90-degree bank,
Mhm.
and it looks more like, it literally looks like a wave. That's the best way to describe it. It literally looks like an ocean's wave, kind of how it's
Mhm.
kind of has a big bending. I don't see, this is, I told you this is going to be a problem.
It's all right.
But yeah, it's
Well,
basically a lot more banking.
yep.
Typically, most wave turns are at a 90-degree banking, so it's a lot more aggressive. And then the other part is a wave turn is probably a little bit more of a turn.
Yep.
You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like there's a more of a direction change and more of a banking. So like a wave turn is just a more extreme version of an off-axis airtime hill. Is
Yeah.
how I would describe it.
I think that's very evident in the naming of those elements too, because we call an off axis airtime hill still an airtime hill. So you could still kind of technically go straight with that element, where with a wave turn, as the name implies, it's an actual turn in the track. So yeah, it's a good way to kind of imagine. And then like an off axis, you're banked outside and you're kind of going in the you're tilted the opposite direction to the turn, where a wave turn you're 90 degrees sideways but you're still tilted in the same direction as the
The
direction of the turn
The other
too.
difference between both, I would say, is an off-axis airtime hill. The banking happens more at the peak of the airtime hill, where
Oh,
a
okay.
wave turn, you're going to actually bank and then change your direction from going up to going down and then bank back. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah, that
Where
makes
an off
sense.
axis airtime hill is more of a gradual bank all the way through the element. You don't get that snappy transition into it and the snappy transition out of it.
Okay, that makes a lot more sense too. All right. So, moving away from airtime hills, I think we should get to another roller coaster staple, and that is the different kinds of loops that we have out there. Because I did not realize the many different kinds of loops there are until I
Yes,
started.
there is a lot. And there's variations and there's
Oh,
custom elements that are only found on specific roller coasters. And yeah, there's a lot you can do when it comes to going upside down. There really is.
yes. So why don't we start with like the bread and butter, just a regular, normal, good old fashioned vertical loop, and I'm talking about the modern one.
Yes, a modern vertical loop found on most arrows that would be probably the best thing to think about is just that. It is a loop. So you
Mhm.
basically enter at ground level, and as you are changing direction to head up towards the air. Instead of like going into an airtime hill to change directions, you just continue going in the same direction until you are completely upside down, and then you continue in that same direction all the way back towards the ground and exit on the same level you entered the element. And a vertical loop is, instead of being a negative G or zero G element like an airtime hill, it is a positive G element because
Mhm.
you are continuing to be pressed in your seat all the way through the element.
Now, I don't know the technical names for these, but can you explain the difference between what I called the modern day loop and the ones that I love on the sports coughs?
Well, so you have the concentric circle loops, which are the very old ones, and
Okay.
they're just that, they're a perfect circle.
Mhm.
Where the modern loop, I don't know the technical name for it either. I know we just talked about it, but I can't remember. Basically, it's more of a teardrop shape.
Yeah.
You do not follow the same like curvature all the way through the loop. So typically the entrance to the loop is a lot bigger circumference, and as you get closer and closer to the top, it gets smaller. And then as
Mhm.
you head back towards the ground, it gets bigger again. And basically all that is for two reasons. A, it minimizes your entrance and exit G's,
Mhm.
and it basically allows the train to maintain the same g-force throughout the entire element, so that way you don't get as much hang time at the top and a bunch of positive g's at the bottom to the point where it's uncomfortable for riders. It
Yeah.
helps to maintain that g-force number all the way through the element, and that's why most modern loops, except for probably the only one that I've ever been on that doesn't have a modern loop, is Copperhead Strike.
Yeah, I wanted to
Yeah.
talk about that since we were talking about loops because I'm like, those things are weird. And before we do get into that, I do just want to say that an example of the older loop, the concentric one that Gabe was talking about, would be Colossus the Fire Dragon at Lagoon. And I absolutely fell in
Yes.
love with that ride. It was so much fun. But
Or
he was telling,
Mindbender.
yeah, that, oh, yeah, that too. But when we went to Lagoon, Gabe was telling me that, I don't know, as like an urban myth or something, but an engineer put a penny in the palm of his hand and he could like hold it open and go through the loop and that penny would stay in his hand because of the G forces that those stinking loops.
Yes.
So, but yes, can we get into what the hell Copperhead Strike does? Because we covered this when me and Gabe talked about our Carowinds trip and just the absolute hang time that is produced by this roller coaster is actually insane.
Yeah, basically, it's just instead of featuring like the teardrop shaped loops, it has normal concentric circles. So it's the same circumference. I shouldn't say circumference, I'm using the wrong word. It's the same diameter throughout the entire loop, right? The
Hmm.
same distance from each end to the other.
Yeah.
And what that does is your entrance velocity, G's, are going to be a lot higher. And when you get to the top of the loop, you're going to actually, instead of being G forces, you're going to get hang time. You're going to hang against the restraint. But they purposely designed it this way so that you would get that hang time at the top of the loop. So you're basically literally hanging from the train. So, like, if it were to stop there, you'd just be hanging. And that's what hang time is.
I would like to point out to everyone that when we took this trip, Gabe told me absolutely nothing about this ride except for the twist out of the station, which I mean, he didn't have to tell me about that. I could see it. It was the most wild experience. Just experiencing this for the first time straight out of the blue. Oh my gosh. And then did we find out that the hang time is even better? Well, it's better in the back row, right?
No,
Was it
it's
better
better
in
in
the
the
back?
front.
It was
It's
better in the
better
front.
in the front.
And it was just crazy how just even position in the train changed that I remember we were decided to ride it in the front row so that we could see that inline twist right at the station, and then we of course rode this coaster a couple of times, so we rode it in the back row, and it was just, yeah, like the first element, so you got somewhat good hang time, but in the back row on the second one you got like nothing and it was crazy. So just a my minor thing about that.
Yeah, it was
So
a fun ride. I liked it.
yeah, it was a lot of fun actually. When we get into loops, like Gabe was saying, there is a lot that can be done. So I think we'll kind of just do a rundown of some of the different other inversions that can be out there, kind of cutting out corkscrews. That'll be a whole thing in and of itself. So with
Corkscrews are not loops. Just a little thing there. They are not loops. They
well,
are a
okay,
different element. They are not
okay.
loops.
Perfect. So, and I don't know if these would technically be considered loops, but the first one I want to get into and have so much fun explaining this, Gabe. What the hell is an Immelman?
An inline loop actually is probably the easiest one to describe.
Oh, okay.
It was just like a vertical loop. So as you enter the element, you start at ground level and you go up and up and up. But except for when you get to the top, so when you're fully upside down, instead
hmm
of continuing the loop back towards the ground, all you do is basically flip back over, so you're upright up, and then you just head back towards the ground. So basically, what an implement loop or an implement loop is it is half a loop, half an airtime hill,
Ah, okay. Yeah, that really isn't that hard to explain.
with a
And
twist to connect the two, basically.
can you think of a good ride that has an Immelman on it?
Any dive loop ever. In fact, every single dive loop that you will ever ride will have an implement loop directly after the first drop. Literally every single
Ah,
one has it. So Valraven, Iron Menace, Dr. Diabolical's Cliffhanger, Yukon Striker, Sharika, Griffin, all of those coasters that are dive coasters have it. I don't think there's a single one that does not have an implement loop. No, I'm
dang.
serious. Like it's a staple of the dive coasters.
hmm
It's also my least favorite loop, if I had to be honest with you. Most of them are kind of especially when you get to the top and it just flips you over and you're like, well, I wanted the rest of that.
Yep.
But
And then
like, I don't know. To each their own, I guess. Some are definitely better than others. I think the best one I've been on is probably on Valraven.
oh
Because it delivers a little bit more forces than the other ones. But yeah,
yeah.
it's probably my least favorite loop.
All right. So moving on from an Immelman, what is a Cobra roll?
A Cobra roll. What coaster is it on?
The most recent one that I can think of is actually Batman and Robin the Chiller.
Cobra. Oh, Cobra roll. Okay. Yeah. So sorry, I was like a Cobra roll. I'm like,
You're
what?
totally fine.
Yes. So Cobra roll is actually two inversions in one.
Yes.
So a Cobra roll is a combination of a implement loop and a corkscrew.
That is a really good way to describe that,
Yes.
actually.
Yes. And then it's a second one, but in reverse, that it's a corkscrew into a dive loop, was what you would
Yeah.
technically call it. So basically, same thing as an implement. So as you're heading up towards the sky, when you get to that peak moment, when you're fully upside down, it's just kind of then enters into a corkscrew. So it kind of rolls and then flattens out, but then it also turns to the left or right, because that's what corkscrews do.
hmm
Corkscrews actually turn to the left and right. So basically, you get to the top and you turn as you're rolling back over to face the right side up. You're actually turning to the left, and then you're like high up in the air, right? And then
hmm
to finish the Cobra roll, you actually go back into a corkscrew. So then you continue to turn to the right, and then you roll back upside down, and then you enter in basically the second half of a vertical loop, where then you're fully upside down, and then as you dive towards the ground, you turn right back side up.
hmm
So yeah, it's basically like an implement into half a corkscrew into another half a corkscrew into a dive loop is
Yeah.
what a Cobra roll essentially is. But it is two inversions. It counts as two inversions, even though it's one ride element.
Color me impressed on how you're able to explain that, because I never could never. So I just gave the example of Batman and Robin the Chiller. That is a defunct coaster that Cobra Roll was on. It was actually one of the main elements on the Robin side. But
Yes.
could you name any other rides that have Cobra Rolls off the top of your head?
Yeah, a lot of the B&M loopers have Cobra rolls of some sort. So like
Okay.
Medusa has a Cobra roll. Some of the stand-ups even had them. Try to think of like usually like older Intamins will have them.
Okay.
Some of the mega loopers from Arrow back in the day had Cobra rolls at the end
Damn.
when they were starting to incorporate more different versions. But typically, it's a staple of the B&M catalog.
Okay. All right. So moving on from that fun element to explain, why don't we talk about what the heck a cutback is?
Yeah, so a cutback is not a loop. So
Okay.
that's the best thing to remember. But cutback is basically a change in direction while you're upside down.
Oh, okay.
So this is another element that is featured on RMCs, or once again going back to Copperhead Strike. Copperhead Strike is a very good cutback on it. But basically, as you're basically, it starts out the same as a loop. So you're starting to head up towards the air, but when you get to the point where you're basically 90-degree vertical,
Mm-hmm.
you kind of roll over onto your back almost, and you basically, it's 180 degrees. So if you're coming into it going the one direction, when you exit it, you're going to be going the opposite direction than you entered it. Does that make sense? So
Yeah.
basically, you get up, you roll, you're upside down, and then it just flips you back upright, and you head back towards the ground. That's why I don't call it a loop, because there's no
Mm-hmm.
looping action, and it's a way to go upside down and change directions very quickly in a very small space. So you don't need a lot of room for a cutback. It's a very quick element. It's a very whippy element, and it is an inversion because you at one point you are fully inverted.
Yep. All right, so kind of in the same vein, and I think this is different, but what is a sidewinder?
A sidewinder is specific to a couple different coasters, but it's actually more specific to a invert coaster.
Okay.
So a sidewinder is basically the same thing as a cobra roll, but you don't have the second half of it.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
but a lot of the inverts from B&M had them. Some of the Intamin launch coasters have them. But yeah, it's basically half a cobra roll. It's the first half of a cobra roll,
Okay, that
almost.
makes sense.
It's kind of like a combination between that and an implement. You have a little bit less of the directional change, like
Mm-hmm.
turning 90 degrees left or right, basically like a corkscrew.
Yeah.
But that's basically what a sidewinder is, and it's more focused like on like the track is above you, so then it
Yeah.
makes more sense that way, I guess. I don't
Yeah.
know.
I know it's hard to explain when we can't like show you a picture and be like this is what a sidewinder is.
Yeah.
So
Kind of the same
that
thing as a batwing too that the inverts will have.
yeah.
I don't know, they're very interesting kind of. Those are hard to describe. Those are
I
really
know.
hard to describe.
Well, and the hard part too sometimes is like maybe it is a staple of only kind of one specific ride. So it's kind of like hard to be like, well, this is what it is. And here's like a ton of examples that I can give you because it's only on like these three coasters. So that's kind of my list of things that are like loopy kind of inversions, but since some of those combine loops and corkscrews, let's get into corkscrews. So, first of all, what the hell is just a regular corkscrew?
A regular corkscrew is exactly like the name corkscrew. Basically, a it looks just like a corkscrew. Actually, that's the best way to describe it. So if you're ever like pulling a cork out of a wine, like those little bird-looking things, the
Yeah.
little the little spiral part that actually goes into the cork, that's exactly what it is. So
Mhm.
basically, like think about like a heart line roll. So just a full part where the track is rolling, and then
Yep.
just take that and like expand it out.
Yeah.
So you're basically going around. um Trying to think of, there's another thing that ah this is dumb.
I'm
I'm
thinking
done. I quit. Like a
everybody go
DNA
back.
strand almost, but
Yeah,
like
that is literally what I was
yes,
just about
yes,
to say. I
yes,
was going to be like, go back to like eighth grade science class when you're talking about that double helix for DNA, and that's
yes,
literally what it looks like on the track. And
and like
generally,
lay it down on its side, and that's what it
yeah.
looks like. So basically, what a corkscrew is, but typically a corkscrew, I guess not all corkscrews are changing direction. Basically, it's a roll that is the basically stretched out So you're rotating. The point you're rotating is farther away from the track. It's not on the track and it's not around the rider. You get
Mm-hmm.
it?
Yeah.
The point of rotation, and
Yeah.
that's exactly what it is.
Yeah. I think another thing too to talk about is so when like a loop takes you upside down, it does it in a vertical motion. So what it does is it
Yes.
starts making you head towards the sky, where when a corkscrew, it's like more of a sideways motion that takes you upside
You're
down
you're
instead of
definitely
a
going to get
vertical
laterals.
motion.
In a corkscrew, you're
Yes.
definitely going to get laterals, especially one that features a change in direction left or right.
Oh yeah.
Um, you're definitely going to get some, but like, yeah. So basically, like a corkscrew, the other way to explain it too is like, as you're flipping up and over, you're also turning to the right or to the left. And then when you exit the element, then you're turning back to the direction you were going.
Yes.
So,
So when we talk about corkscrews, you mentioned it too. What exactly is a heartline roll?
so a heartline roll is completely different. So a heartline roll is just a barrel roll. So
Okay.
just a rotation in the track, but the center of rotation is the heartline of the rider.
Okay.
So instead of rotating around, so like an inline twist would be rotating around the track itself,
Yeah.
or a barrel roll would be rotating around the track itself, where a heartline roll, you're actually rotating around the rider
That makes
position.
sense. Yeah.
So, but it's basically just a barrel roll like an airplane would do, or
Yeah.
you know what I'm saying? It's just
Yeah.
the center of rotation is in what they call the heartline of the rider. Basically, a heartline roll eliminates a lot of the lateral motions that you would get like in a corkscrew or an inline
Mhm.
twist.
Okay. So then in this kind of same vein, what is a 0G roll?
A zero G roll is basically the same thing as a heartline roll, but placed on an airtime hill.
Okay.
So basically, so think about like an airtime hill as you're heading up away from the ground, you're gaining elevation, then you actually start to roll, and when you get to the peak of the elevation, or where the elevation change or where the direction change would be, then you're upside down. So then you get the 0G part of it, and then you roll back to upright as you're heading back towards the ground.
Okay. So then this is kind of like I didn't know where to put this because I'm like it's kind of a loopy motion, but it's also kind of a rolly motion. So I'm just going to put it here because we already talked about a 0G stall or roll. What is a 0G stall?
So 0G stall is exactly what an airtime hill is,
Mhm.
but instead of rolling through it like a 0G roll,
Yep.
basically you flip upside down, you go through the entire length of the quote unquote airtime hill part of the element, and then as you're heading back towards the ground, that's when you actually roll back over. So basically, like a 0G roll is one continuous roll
Yep.
all the way through the element, right?
Yep.
Where a 0G stall is you're going to flip upside down, then so basically your rotations of inverting are two separate moments. So you flip
Yep.
upside down, then you hit the airtime moment part of it, and then as you're heading back towards the ground, then you invert back upright. So it is
Yes.
basically like a very elongated 0G roll with where the two flipping over parts are separated by the airtime hill moment.
That makes sense. I will say this, it is one of the trippiest sensations to
Basically
be
upside down airtime.
yeah,
It
and
is weird.
it's
It is very weird.
just to
Especially the ones that are done well.
yes, I was just about to say, if anybody's listened to any episodes of our podcast, Gabe talked about the 0G stall on Goliath, and anytime we did every other, like, so a 0G stall has kind of been a staple of the RMCs. And so Gabe's been looking for one that's been as good as the one on Goliath. The one on Goliath is so long, it just holds you there for so freaking long, it's not even funny. And then we finally rode Air Force One, and the 0G stall on Air Force One is so good, guys. You just gotta ride the coaster, you just gotta go do it. So
I think some of the problem is why we love that element so much. That was our first ever 0G stall ever when
yeah.
Goliath opened. And I just remember getting off that thing, and I don't even think you were there. I think it was just me and my dad that time we rode it. And I was like, holy, like, what just happened? Like, what? It was, like, literally, I was, like, speechless. I was like, what just
Mhm.
happened? I have no idea. Like, we gotta ride that again just so I can figure out what the heck that even was. But it's definitely one of my favorite elements. It's definitely one of the elements that is very, very easy to make it way too short.
Yes. Oh,
Because that is the
yes.
biggest issue with most of them, is they're way too short, or they don't actually really truly have like the 0G part of it.
Mhm.
Goliath is like just it's, I don't know, RMC does that a lot, where they like completely blow an element out of the water, and then they're just like, man, we don't need to do that anymore. It's like, why? You did it so well the first time. Why would you change it?
Mhm. Oh
Ah!
yeah.
But
Oh
yes,
yeah.
that is so good.
All
So good.
right. So, another RMC thing, since we're talking about RMC, and I experienced mine on Twisted Cyclone at Six Flags Over Georgia, and of course, Gabe's was on Iron Gwazi, but the death dive.
Yeah, well, I'm gonna tell you right now, the one you experience is not a death roll. It's
Okay.
just not.
Mm.
It's just not. It is way too small, way too short. It's just not. Like, you can say you experienced it, but really you did
I
not.
I'm only saying I experienced it because it was literally my favorite element on that ride, so it made me even more excited to ride Iron Gwazi. But get into what this element actually
So
is.
all the death roll is, and it's not a death dive, it's a
I'm
death
sorry.
roll.
I always
Gosh,
call
because
it
it's
the
an
wrong thing.
alligator. That's the theme. No, I'm serious. That's the theme of Iron Gwazi. That's why it's called the death roll, because that's what alligators
Oh.
do. Yeah, it's a whole
Okay.
thing. Anyway,
Sorry.
what the death roll is, it's just basically a barrel roll, but on a downward slope. So most barrel rolls or heartline rolls or inline twists are parallel to the ground. They are
Yep.
even with the ground, where a death dive is basically on a drop. So as you are heading towards the ground, and Iron Gwazi is especially drawn out and awesome because it is like 140-foot tall element or something like that.
Ridiculous.
Basically, as you're diving towards the ground, the train does a barrel roll. So
Mhm.
that's the other difference, is most barrel rolls or heartline rolls or inline twists, you maintain the same speed or even lose a little bit of speed going
Mhm.
through the element because it's at a horizontal pitch, where once you are heading towards the ground, this element you actually speed up as you go through it, and in the back row you get absolutely yeeted through the element. I mean, it is just insane, and it is by far my favorite inversion element, ride element, whatever you want to call it, of all time. I absolutely love it every time I got to ride it. Now I want to go back to Florida. We're going back to Florida, damn it.
I was thinking about taking a vacation there this week. I almost did. I quite a few.
Yeah,
Well,
calling in sick.
I wasn't gonna go there though. I was gonna go to the Keys and park my butt on a beach.
But
Anyways.
yeah, it is specific to Iron Gwazi. The other roller coasters have featured down roll or downward barrel roll drops or whatever you want to call it, but the
Mhm.
death roll, the quote unquote death roll, is specific to Iron Gwazi.
All right. So with that kind of covering the corkscrew section, I had one
There's
more.
more?
There are so many
Oh, I
different
know. We
elements.
could we could literally do like 3 hour long episodes on this and still not cover every single ride element that's out there, just because of all of the ones that are specific to certain roller coasters. That being said, a lot of what we're talking about today are general kind of cookie cutter elements that you can find on multiple different rides. Multiple different manufacturers have their own versions. Now, of
Yep.
course, there's always variants too of these, where it's like a
Uh,
downward barrel roll with this added on, or a corkscrew with this added on, or a cobra roll with this part added on or
oh
taken
yeah.
away, or whatever. So there's
Mhm.
always going to be that one coaster that's going to have a variant or different slight twist, or and that's what makes roller coasters so unique, is you have all these different basic elements. But even the basic elements, I mean, you can make them taller, you can make them wider, you can make them shorter, you can make them whippier, you can make them more drawn out. Like, there's so many things you can do just to, like, even in a vertical loop.
Oh
You can
yeah.
make it like look at Copperhead Strike
Oh
versus
yeah.
like some of the other loopers, and you could, or like look at B&Ms where they have 114-foot tall vertical loops that are just massive elements. I mean,
Yep.
like even these basic elements you can do so much with, and I think that's what's so unique about roller coasters. And then there's also the Six Flags idea where we're just gonna copy and paste everything we build. So you
Oh
know,
yeah. Yeah. So, but I wanted to talk about this one next because everyone that I had experienced had not been upside down, and then we did one of our defunct episodes, and I found out, oh, there is an upside down version that once existed. But what is a top hat?
a top hat is a top hat. You wear it. It goes on your head.
In roller coaster terms,
Oh,
please.
okay. Okay. So a top hat is basically an airtime hill, but more exaggerated.
Yes.
Basically, to consider it a top hat, you have to have a vertical ascent and a vertical descent.
Oh, okay.
That is what I would consider a top hat. So basically, like an airtime hill doesn't have to be vertical up and vertical down, like
Mm-hmm.
90 degrees up, 90 degrees down. Where a top hat, you basically are going straight up 90 degrees vertically. And a lot of top hats also have like twists
Yeah.
going up, or like sometimes the track can twist or something like that, or like on the way down it'll have some kind of roll or something, but it doesn't have to. A straight up top hat literally is just a vertical track. So basically you're going parallel to the ground, you transition into vertical, and then you get to the top and you transition from vertical up to vertical down, and then at the bottom you go back to horizontal. And that's what a top hat is. It's basically, like I said, an airtime hill, but very greatly exaggerated.
Greatly exaggerated is right because the ones that, of course, first come to our minds are Top Thrill and King Ka, which have obviously extremely exaggerated top hats.
Yes, yes. Wicked at
um.
Lagoon,
Oh yeah, that's a good point.
vertical top hat.
So, and
Nice
then the
little
one,
top hat.
and like I said, most of these are not an inversion. You go, you stay upright the entire time. But like I said, with our defunct coaster, I keep talking about this on this episode for some reason. But Batman and Chiller, the Batman side was actually a top hat that flipped you upside down. So at the peak, you were actually upside down in that top hat. But moving on from inversions, because we've talked about a lot of them now, I feel like we've used this term and never really explained what it is in like any of our episodes. And I feel like it's self-explanatory, but at the same time, I also worry that people don't know what we're talking about. So, what is a head chopper, Gabe?
It's where your head gets chopped off and you die. No.
Way to be dramatic, jeez.
Yeah. No, a head chopper or a near miss moment or anything of that sort. Basically, all it is it's a constraint in the area around the roller coaster. A lot of wooden roller coasters have these. So
Yes.
basically, it's part of the structure or part of another piece of track, or even like it could be the ground being really close to you, or like tunnels. Basically, what it is it's taking the area around the train and confining it into a smaller. Basically, it's another way to feel claustrophobic. Is it just a smaller
Yes.
space around the track? But like a head chopper in particular is a above the head, and it literally feels like you're going to get your head knocked off. But obviously, all modern roller coasters feature this safety envelope. Like it'll never actually happen.
Yep.
Like, but like it feels, especially at higher speeds, it feels like you're going to hit it. Like that's what I would
Oh,
call a head chopper or a near miss moment
yeah.
or something of that nature.
I can think of, so there's the like I it's a near miss head chopper. The tunnel on the helix on the beast.
Oh,
Like
absolutely. That's definitely, yeah.
but then I also think of like if you want a more modern version on Fury 325, there's that near miss section or little moment with one of the supports when you're coming around. It's
And
specific to the one side of the train.
yeah, the other thing too is it doesn't have to be like the roller coaster you're on. Sometimes you're going underneath another roller coaster, or like even like on Max Force where you go through the tunnel underneath the train tracks.
Oh yeah.
that's a head chopper, and that's not part of the roller coaster. That's just part of another ride that you had to go underneath or over, or you get what I'm saying. It doesn't have
Oh
to
yeah.
necessarily. It could be trees, it could be
Oh yeah.
bushes, it could be the ground. It's just something you feel like either you can reach out and touch it, or like it's gonna hit you in the forehead. That's what a
Yes.
near miss element or a head chopper would be.
I could also talk about near misses on dueling coasters. It was a staple of Dueling Dragons
Yes.
when it did run, is this the interaction between those two trains, and you would have near misses with like another train and the people on said train, which is crazy to think about. And exactly like Gabe said,
Gemini. Gemini. That's a good example. And
Gabe's,
that on that
Gabe's
situation, it's other riders.
yeah, well, we rode Gemini, and Gabe has like, in the most loving way possible, because I am his sister, he has giant gorilla arms. Like, they're so long. I call him gorilla arms. And he was giving people on the other train high fives. So
Yeah.
I just, yeah, that is it's a really interesting way to spruce up the experience on a roller coaster, because
It is.
you don't really have to like actually, it's not technically an element within the ride itself sometimes. Like Gabe said, it's just incorporating the environment around the roller coaster, which makes it really fun.
And it could turn a really boring moment into a very exciting moment.
Oh
Like if you
yeah.
have a piece of straight track to get back to the station, or if it's just a banked curve, or you get what I'm saying. It take a very normal, boring out. Even loops, like sometimes
Oh yeah.
vertical loops, like on Demon, you have the tunnel. Like it's
Oh
just a
yeah.
straight piece of track. It's just a straight piece. Like it does nothing. It does not do go up, down, left, or right. It is a straight piece of track. But then they're like, we'll put a tunnel on it and lights, and that's like a whole new other element that
Oh
maybe the
yeah.
coaster would have just been really boring. You've been like, well, that kind of sucked. And actually, it's one of the better moments on the roller coaster now.
I think of the one baked turn on the Whizzer where you have a near miss moment with the freaking
Yes.
ground. And like,
Yes.
it's like Gabe said, in reality, it's just a really open, big, swooping banked turn. But because you are very close to the ground, going what seems like very fast, and having the ground so close to you, making you feel like you're going even faster, it becomes one of the most thrilling moments on that ride. So
Oh, absolutely.
it can do a lot to really, just like I said, enhance the experience for your ride. But moving on from that, I figure we should talk about what I would actually call a really interesting element, because it's not found on a lot of roller coasters, and how a lot of them nowadays are what we call quote unquote fake and don't function as brakes for a ride. But what is a splashdown?
Oh, that's not where I thought you were going with that. If I'm being 100% honest there. All a splashdown is exactly what it sounds like. It is the roller coaster train basically skimming across a body of water. Now, a traditional splashdown actually has like little scoops on the
Mm-hmm.
back car of the train, and it actually will act as a braking system to slow the train down, because it's actually literally scooping water and splashing it. Where like some quote unquote splashdowns now don't actually have the scooping action. They're just like little
Mm-hmm.
jets they put in the water to spray water. That's a very cool visual moment though. If you want, like if you have an
Yes.
area where you're gonna have people walking by, or like you just want a picturesque moment for this roller coaster, it is also cool for the riders. I mean, if going through and like feeling like you're going to skim across the water, unless you're riding Mindbender, then it's a little sketchy. But
Yes. Where
but yeah, that's all splashdown is. It's basically the track skimming along a body of water, and like there's spray or splash as the train goes through it. Some of them actually feature scoops on the train itself, where some of them are just little jets spraying out of the water to make the visual effect and not the actual braking effect.
we do, there still is a traditional splashdown, and it's on a B&M coaster at Kings Island, but I am spacing on the name.
Diamondback.
Thank
Diamondback
you.
is probably the world's most famous splashdown. And that one
Yes.
is an actual legit splashdown. Like it actually has scoops on the train, and it actually slows down when you go through that element.
Exactly. It's very cool, and like Gabe said, it is very picturesque. You get these really cool arcing uh basically like tails of water behind the train, and it is really thrilling as a rider on the train to just be heading towards a body of water. So it is, just a fun little element that I feel like we don't get to experience very often. And then, like I said too, or and Gabe was explaining, some of them aren't actual scoops anymore, which for some reason to me just makes it more interesting that they actually factor that breaking effect of the water into the engineering of the roller coaster, which is just like the sciencey nerdy side of me coming out, going, "Oh, that's cool," instead of just faking it with jets. So with that, why don't we go into another element that is found on a lot of wooden coasters, but can also be found on a lot of steel coasters: helixes.
Helixes, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, those things. Helixes. I don't know how to describe that. I don't know,
Well,
it's just a banked, it's just basically a helix is just a banked turn that also ascends or descends. So
well, and I
like,
think the point is too that like most of the time they are 360 degrees or more.
yes, I would agree with that statement.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask, because we talk about on American Eagle, it has the Rose Bowl. We call it the Rose Bowl. Is that an element specific to American Eagle?
It's an element specific to a certain like wooden roller coasters, like the wooden giants. They call them rose bowls. But that's basically a helix, is what that
Okay.
is. It's just a very
Yeah.
large, drawn
So
out
I
version.
just
The other reason they call it the quote unquote Rose Bowl is because of the Rose Bowl Stadium. It looks like a football
Oh.
stadium from like
Okay.
the aerial view of it and
Yeah.
just the overall structure of it. So that's where kind of the whole name from came from, because here in Big Ten country, we always played in the Rose Bowl at the Rose Bowl Stadium, the Rose Bowl game. So that's
Yeah.
kind of where that name comes from, is that. But yeah, it looks like a football stadium because it's so big. It's such a big circular looking ride element that
Yep.
from the air it looks like a football stadium. So then they started calling them Rose Bowls.
I had always wondered why they call it the Rose Bowl, so this is my like very roundabout way of being like, Gabe, why the hell do they call it a Rose Bowl?
Because it literally
So
looks like a football stadium. Like
yeah.
that's we're very creative naming people here in the roller coaster injury. Just ask how they renamed fucking I-305 Pantherian. Woohoo! Yeah.
We can also talk about like the bajillion Goliaths that are in the
Yeah.
Six Flags train, and none of them
Or Batman the ride, or Superman the ride, or yeah,
or the
Wonder
Dark
Woman the
Knight
ride, the
rides,
Dark Knight ride. Yeah.
the Jokers.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Lots of
we're
jokers out there. We're very creative naming
so
people here in the
creative.
roller coaster. Some of them have great names, and then some of them you're like, why? Why
Oh, I
is this a
know.
thing? I mean, just Pantherian. That one's probably the one that's the most recent in my mind. You go from Intimidators 305, and then it became Project 305, which was still kind of cool. And then they're like, you know what? Let's rename this Pantherian. Huh? That's like the one going into freaking Six Flags Great America. Wrath of Rakashka. Rashashka. I can't even say it. Like, what is that? That's not a thing. Could have at least just called it Skydiver. I think that would have been better than Wrath of Rakashka. Anyway, that's my rant for the day.
I was just to say there's Gabe's rant on stupid roller coaster names. It's so right though, because some of them are so great. Because we have like Millennium Force, and we have Copperhead Strike, or Colossus the Fire Dragon, and stuff like that. And then yeah, and then you have like
Then
five
there's
million.
Thunder Striker. What? What is that?
Or we Gabe discovered there's like 3 different freaking RMCs with Cyclone in the name. There's because
Yeah.
so Welcome to roller
or
coasters.
RMC's naming. Just put iron in front of everything.
Yeah, that too.
Iron Gwazi, Iron Rattler. Well, Wildcat's Revenge was kind of cool, but I mean,
Yeah.
it's, you know what I mean? No, it's just.
Yeah. Yes.
Sorry. Yes. We need to figure out better naming practices. Okay.
Yeah, we actually, that needs to be like a meeting somewhere in the roller coaster world.
Yeah.
But with
X2
that,
vertical velocity. What are we doing here? What do we do? I could go on this subject for a while. I think that's the end of this episode. That's just how we're gonna end it. I'm mad at names.
I was actually gonna say we're getting to about the hour mark, so this would be a good spot to wrap it up. We've kind of given you an overview,
What's your favorite? You gotta pick a favorite. I already picked mine, so you gotta pick a favorite.
Favorite element?
Yeah, or inversion, or
it's one we didn't talk about.
Oh, of course. What's your favorite?
It's remarkably simple. I didn't think it needed much explanation, so I didn't really go into it. But tunnels, I freaking love tunnels.
That's your no, specific to a roller coaster. You have to pick it on like. So, which is your favorite tunnel then?
Oh well, Hades 360, duh.
Oh, duh. Yeah. Okay.
So, what's yours?
I already said it's the death roll on Iron Gwazi.
Oh yeah, you did. Never mind.
It's either that or the 0G roll on Goliath. There's nothing that's really that well. Maybe the Outer Banked Airtime Hill on Area Force 1, because that thing is just out of this world insane. The arcade roll, that's another good one.
Yeah.
I still think it's the death roll on Iron Gwazi, though. That's definitely.
See, that's a note I should put here. We might have to do this in like a completely separate episode. Is that a lot of roller coasters have such unique elements that they've been given their own names. We could talk about the Rolling Thunder Hill on El Toro. We could talk about the Treble Cliff.
That's a good one.
Yeah, we could talk about the Treble Clef element on Fury 325, which
the
is
cliff
just
dive off of the quarry wall.
Yeah, we could talk. And Gabe just mentioned the arcade roll for Area Force 1. I mean, there are so many that we could get into that are like just specifically named for their coaster that they're riding on for completely different reasons. Like again, going into the Rolling Thunder Hill on El Toro, that was named because it is an extremely intense moment on that roller coaster, but it was actually named
the best moment on El Toro. It is the best moment on El Toro.
But it's named after the roller coaster it went over. So it's not even named for basically anything on El Toro. It's named because of a different ride in the park that it went over. But again, the Treble Clef element on Fury 325 is named because of the shape that it makes. So, and like the arcade roll on Area Force 1, that's a roll that goes over the arcade. So that's why they call it the arcade roll. We could talk about the Lagoon roll on Lagoon. Or on Cannibal, sorry, and
that's another good one.
That could be a whole episode in and of itself. Oh my gosh!
So, I will say this. So, in past episodes, before we've ridden Area Force Run, I always said the Heartline roll on Max Force, the 60-mile-an-hour Heartline roll, was the closest you could get to the Maverick Heartline roll.
Mm-hmm.
That is now an incorrect statement. The arcade roll on Area Force 1 is probably the closest you can get to the Heartline roll in Maverick, because that element is just insane.
Oh yeah,
it is. It's almost too much. That's probably why it's not quite my favorite, because it is almost too much.
I will say this: keeping in mind I have not ridden Iron Gwazi, there have been only 2 rides that I have ridden out of all of my credits that have made me gray out, and the first one is the pull out on Millennium Force. Not Millennium Force. Yeah, Millennium Force. My gosh. That pull out.
You mean Millennium Forceless? Is that what you meant?
Yes, I do. That ride
makes you gray out. Millennium Forceless makes you gray out.
And then, granted, we had ridden Area Force 1 like a bajillion times, but it was like once it had gone warmed up and that train had went through a couple times and we had a full train, riding in the front row on Area Force 1, I grayed out and the pull out of the arcade roll. So that should tell you how fast.
The whole back section, that whole little back section there behind the arcade is whew.
We're gonna have to
Wow.
do a whole episode on Air Force One because it needs it.
We just need to do a whole episode on RMCs. Just rank them all that we've been on. Let's do a whole RMC episode.
But
we just need to do
that,
a whole RMC episode. We have for freaking intimate. Sorry.
No, you're good. Go ahead.
We just have to do a whole RMC episode. We're gonna do one on intimate here in the next couple episodes. We just need to throw an RMC one in now.
Yeah.
We just talk everything RMC.
That actually would be such a fun time. We might need to make that 2 episodes though.
Yeah.
So with that brings us to the end of this episode. Our question everything on ride
that
elements
went a lot
and forces.
longer than I thought it was going to go. To be honest with you,
I thought it would be at least an hour, but I mean, we could still go on. There's still more we can talk about, but let's just leave it here for now. I feel like this is a really good generalized
Part
overview, 2? And
this will be. Don't.
No, we won't do a part 2.
Not yet.
Exactly. So this will be a really good place for people to start if they don't know some of the more technical terms that we use in some of our episodes, especially if we're doing like a walkthrough of a roller coaster and we just say it was an Immelman. Now you'll actually know what the train was doing and such. And then what this can help with too is me and Gabe's better than I am, but he can watch a POV and just be like, oh, that's an Immelman, that's a corkscrew, that's a heartline roll versus a 0G and stuff like that just from watching a POV. So I think it's a really good place for beginner roller coaster enthusiasts to kind of get some more info and stuff. But with that, Gabe, why don't you get into our schedule? What is coming up for future episodes?
Mine cars, mine trains.
Yeah.
So we have two battle episodes coming up, and then like I was talking about Coasters 101. This will be our second Coasters 101.
I believe
Coasters
so.
101. This was almost the same thing as a Coasters 101. It was just a different formatting. That's why we called it the Question Everything.
Yeah.
But we're going to be talking about intimate amusement rides and how they started and kind of how they got a name for themselves. Basically, the history. That's going to be another hour long. That's going to be at least an hour long.
At least an hour long.
But we have two battle episodes coming before that. So Mine Cars, Mine Trains, and then a personal favorite of mine, janky but fun.
Oh yeah.
So the biggest way to describe a janky but fun roller coaster is it's definitely not the best ride in the park. But once you get off of it, you can't help but just smile.
Oh yeah.
Just like, man, that was a great time. I enjoyed that, even though it probably actually sucks and most people hate it. Yeah. But as roller coaster enthusiasts, we really don't truly hate any roller coasters unless it is Steel Vengeance. So with that, after that, after the Coasters 101 Intimate episode and our two next battle ones, we'll be going back into battle episodes, custom layout arrows, and tunnels.
Yeah.
Which, ironically, your favorite tunnel is not going to be in that episode. But
but
still a good episode.
Exactly.
Mine's a little bit of a cheat, honestly. A tunnel, kind of. I don't know. I'm calling it a tunnel. So
Gabe's calling it a tunnel because he wants to talk about that roller coaster, and he didn't really have anything else that worked on his list of coasters.
I had a couple.
Well, I had one that literally is all about tunnels. And I really wanted to cover it. So, but with that, everybody, of course, remember our email, coasterwars@gmail.com, or coasterwarspodcast@gmail.com. And then any of our socials, comment, give us any criticisms, that stuff. And thank you for listening. We'll see y'all next week.
And we hope you all have a great day.